Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. We're the Formula 1 podcast for fans and by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-driver, or shall I say my co-host, Sam. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Hello, Will. Hello again, listeners. I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, not too bad. How was your weekend?
It was good, but also emotional. My brother, who was featured on the podcast last week, is our reporter who sent a lovely postcard in from Monza. He's ticking off all the milestones at the moment. He's got married, had his honeymoon, and now has flown off to Australia, not to take up position for the Melbourne Grand Prix next year, sadly. He's gone to go and work out there for an incentive with his wife. So I was wishing him off yesterday. So that was a bit sad, but obviously very excited for him. But he is going to the Melbourne Grand Prix, so I've secured us another postcard, or at least 2 postcards then.
Very good, very good. Well,
how about you?
Best of luck, Greg. If you're listening to this, have a great time. My weekend was very nice. So we took our daughter to a local farm, which had one of the most eclectic collections of animals I think I've ever seen in one place. It was it's great, but quite a weird collection in general. So you've got like all the traditional farm animals. So they've got pigs, and they had some piglets as well, which is really cute. Horses and ducks and geese and sheep and goats and whatever else. Then you get a few kind of sort of out there farmish, I guess, farming animals in the shape of kind of alpacas, llamas, that kind of vibe, which was great. Very nice. And then there was all the sort of small things, rabbits, guinea pigs and all that. And then there's just a random space for like really unsettling creepy crawlies like tarantulas and scorpions. And they had like terrapins.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah, and our daughter, she quite liked stroking a lizard, a bearded dragon. That was quite nice. She enjoyed that. I had to like hold her back from grabbing it because I didn't think that was a good idea. But yeah, no, it was really nice. It was very hot. She slept for a lot of the afternoon, as it turned out. But yeah, no, it was very nice, really nice place, nice day. And then had a very chilled Sunday. It was weird without much sport. I mean, I know the Rugby World Cup started, so I watched a bit of that, which was good. But yeah, no Formula 1, no Premier League football. It was feels like a bit of a black spot in the sporting calendar, actually. You
didn't watch the international friendlies on Saturday night?
Couldn't give less of a...
Yeah, I agree with you there.
No, just don't even care. It's not a football podcast either, and we talk about the football plenty of times. So I thought this weekend
we'll skip. We'll
take a break.
I suppose the good thing about your daughter is that she's not at the age yet where she sees something and goes, "Daddy, I want that." So you've not ended up with a lizard yet, so that's good.
No, that's true. Yeah, I'm sure conversations like that are coming sooner rather than later. She's pretty chatty, but no, she's not got to a point where she's requesting anything more than food, cuddles,
nice
specific books, and or entertainment. Yeah.
Oh wow, specific books. Wow.
Yeah, well, I sent you a video, didn't I? She's running. She's sort of half running now. She's charging around the place, which is quite good fun. Yeah.
And I sent you a good video of Goodwood Revival. Yeah, which is this weekend. They had a race where kids could push cars basically. That could be your daughter's first race. That could be the first thing she gets onto the ladder.
Yeah,
spotted there. Next thing you know, she's in the Mercedes driver program, being tutored by Lewis Hamilton. Done.
The first step on the ladder towards 2042 world champion.
Yeah, and with the running that she showed this in the video you sent me, she'd be quite good at running because they did the old-fashioned sort of run to the car, jump in. She'd be good at that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, fingers crossed, we'll get there one day.
Very good. So we're not going to spend the podcast discussing the route to Formula 1 for your daughter. We're going to spend it talking about what we think are the greatest controversies in Formula 1. Quite a bit of a mouthful, that. If you're new to Formula 1, you'll enjoy learning about some key moments in Formula 1 history. And if you're a diehard fan like us, we hope you'll enjoy the sort of deep dive into some fascinating events that have taken place. And we've both picked recent events, so that should make it a bit more interesting and exciting for you, and easier to know because you'll know some of the characters that pop up. So Sam, I think we decided you're going to kick us off with the first half, and I'll cover one in the second half. What is your greatest controversy?
Well, I'm not sure there'll be many surprises on this particular podcast. So we've talked a bit about this before, actually, on numerous episodes, and I still think it's probably the biggest controversy the sport's ever seen. Yep. And that is, of course, Abu Dhabi 2021.
Yeah. You've been wanting to talk about this since we started the podcast. So I'm glad we've now found a way and a time to do it, because I think it's time to let out the system and discuss it in detail, because it is such a major thing that we referred to quite a bit throughout, but it's good just to put it in the spotlight and have a look at.
Yeah, we've never really talked about it in any detail. I think that is largely by design, because we've wanted to focus on the current season, the racing, and then when we've done other episodes, we've not necessarily wanted to enter into what I suspect will be quite a polemic discussion about one of the worst, one of the worst things ever to happen in sport, never mind Formula One. We'll get to all of that because it is and it was. So yeah, I think we've picked a good time as well. I mean, we're obviously getting to a point nearly where the World Championships decided this year. Yeah, I don't think there's ever a bad time for a bit of catharsis. So why not? Let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah, if you're Michael Massey or Michael Massey's family, I'd switch off now. Go and go for a walk or read a book.
Yes. Although I don't hold him totally to blame. I think there are a lot of other factors at play, and the kind of system of operation that was in place that allowed that situation to happen. I think he was obviously an important part, but yeah, I think he was sort of left at the mercy of a pretty poorly executed system and designed system anyway, which we'll talk about because there were other races throughout the year that had some particularly interesting incidents occur. So
that's a good teaser. Do you want to set the scene for us then?
All right. So 2021 was probably the greatest Formula One season ever until the last race. I think personally, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Either way, it's definitely up there. It was one of the most exciting battles for a championship we have seen in a very, very long time. I think the last time it was this close, it was probably Hamilton-Rosberg. But before that, you're probably going back into the 90s and well into the 90s, most likely, when it was sort of Schumacher. Massa Lewis, yeah, okay.
Massa Lewis.
Yeah,
or the one before, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, it was one that went down to the wire, right?
Yeah, and it was an extraordinary season. Two brilliant teams, two brilliant cars, two brilliant drivers going at it. It was a bit of a roller coaster all season because there were periods where Max and Red Bull won quite a few races in a row and it looked like they were going to run off with the championship. Mercedes then came roaring back, won a load of races themselves. They themselves built a lead, and then Red Bull came back again after the summer break and won a load of races. And it was just, it was a bit of a topsy-turvy season. You never really knew which way it was going to go. And we also saw quite a lot of flashpoints between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who were both the two main protagonists throughout the season. They raced each other extremely hard. I mean, they kind of did before, but I don't really feel like Max ever had a car that he could really compete with Lewis in. Yeah. It was this was the first season we saw that those two were very evenly matched.
It was like equal, weren't they? Really? I mean, the car performance did fluctuate from period to period. With, like you say, with Red Bull being dominant and then Merc, but if you look across the season, it felt like they were in sort of equal machinery, really.
Yeah, definitely, and it was unbelievably close. I don't think there weren't really many races. So we talked a lot about races this season where it's just been a total canter for Max, and he's won by 30, 40 seconds at a time. There weren't really many like that during the course of that season. Basically, when both of the drivers finished, they finished pretty closely with each other or to each other. And it made for a really fantastic spectacle. Like, I don't really remember a bad race that whole season. And I think I watched, if not all of them, pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
But there were a number of flashpoints. So I guess we should probably talk a bit about Silverstone. That definitely set the tone, I think, for a lot of the rest of the season. So Max had built quite a bit of a lead by the time that race came around. Mercedes finally got around to developing the car that season and then chucked a load of upgrades at it, ready for Silverstone, and they were much more competitive. And basically on the opening lap, Lewis Hamilton tried to make the overtake on Max Verstappen into Copse Corner. They made contact and Max shot off the circuit and smashed up the car and ended up going to hospital for checks and stuff. And we talked previously about kind of what happened in the rest of that race and what it meant probably for Red Bull and Max moving forwards, in particular, what it meant for Lewis and the rest of it. So we won't necessarily go over all of that, but it was probably a flashpoint worth highlighting in the context of Abu Dhabi because it really did set the tone. It became, from that point onwards, quite I don't know, I think it crossed over from respectfully competitive to
agreed
I want to say hatred, but there was a real friction between them.
Bad blood, like real anger, and
scores had to be settled, I think, after that.
And I've seen quotes of Red Bull, keeping Red Bull, saying they felt like that. They felt like they had to get their own back and they had to settle the score because it was such a, in their opinion, it was such a deliberate, awful crash that Lewis kind of subjected Max to what he didn't need to.
Yeah, which we both disagree with intently. I think we both agreed it was a perfectly reasonable overtake to make. They just came together as a racing instant. We've seen similar things happen in other corners throughout the course of the last few years, and it's a pretty normal racing instant. But obviously, in the context of a close title fight, and the fact that sort of the way Red Bull operate in general meant that was the sort of animosity that really struck a chord through the rest of the season. And then we went to Italy, where we saw, and I've jokingly said this a few times now, where Max parked his car on top of Lewis, and that is kind of what happened. I think Max, and we saw, what's interesting is we've just had Monza, right, the same circuit where that incident in particular happened, and a similar pair of overtakes happened. One of which involved Max, and he did leave a lot more space in a car that was much bigger this season than it was in 2021. And he basically took the opportunity to kind of take Lewis out of the race and said afterwards, "That's what you get when you don't leave space." And again, it was just yet another example of the animosity between the two of them. And then we had Saudi Arabia, of course, where and I'd completely forgotten about this until you reminded me earlier, where Max sort of gained an unfair advantage on Lewis throughout the course of the on one particular overtake and was told to give the place back. He slowed right down to try and give the place back at a convenient location. Then he slammed the brakes on and it looked like he brake checked Lewis. Lewis drove into the back of him. Massive amount of controversy attached to that. As it turns out, Lewis went on to win the race with damage anyway. And I guess the justice with that particular race was that both cars finished 1 and 2, and they were probably in the right order, given who was in the right and who was in the wrong throughout the course of the race. That felt, I don't know, that felt like a fair ending for that race, and it obviously gave us the excitement of a kind of shootout coming up potentially in Abu Dhabi as well. And then Brazil, we should definitely talk about. So we've listed that as one of our favourite races ever, for good reason. So this was one of those classic examples where there's a concern raised about a specific piece of the car. In this case, it was the rear wing. They did some tests on the rear wing of Lewis Hamilton's car after qualifying and established that it wasn't entirely legal, although Mercedes were really angry about this because they basically tested the rear wing in a way that they'd never tested it before, and it felt pretty unfair. Anyway, Lewis got relegated to the back of the grid, decided to take a new engine, and then over the course of the sprint race and the Grand Prix, he managed to get all the way from the back of the grid to first, and he overtook Max during the Grand Prix after, again, a really feisty tussle where Max ran him off the road. So if you remember the lap before he made the overtake, or 2 laps before he made the overtake. So again, it's just to give some context that throughout the whole season, the racing had been really hard. The contest had been really exciting. It made for really good TV. The viewing figures were absolutely through the roof. I mean, Drive to Survive is definitely a factor there, of course, as well. But the excitement on track was what was driving a lot of sort of attention to the sport. And then, so we end up with both drivers on level points. Remarkably, I think it was like 242.5 each or something mad, because they awarded half points after Belgium. Again, that was a bit of a suspect piece of decision making as well.
2 laps race under the safety car and the half points were awarded.
That's right. Yeah, bizarre that decision, and that also meant, I think at the time, it meant all the fans that turned up and sat in the rain for 7 or 8 hours weren't going to get any money back, but they thankfully reversed that decision, because I think there would have been riots if they hadn't. So yeah, we arrive in Abu Dhabi, and the drivers are level on points. Max has a slight advantage because he'd won one more race than Lewis. He'd won 2 more races than Lewis that season, hadn't he?
Yeah.
So he had a slight advantage there, because if they'd finished level on points, Max would have won because he'd won more races. So to all intents and purposes, if Max had driven into Lewis in turn 1, taken both cars out, Max would have been the world champion. And we get to the race, and it's kind of a mad race, isn't it? Really, I mean, quite a lot happens just in that one race. So there was a period in the middle where sort of 20 or 30 laps where it just looked like Lewis was going to drive off into the sunset and win. But yeah, there were definitely some flashpoints. So should we start with the start? Lewis got away quite well. Max qualified on pole. Lewis qualified second. Lewis got a really good start off the line, bearing in mind he was on medium tyres, Max was on softs. So Max was fully expecting to be leading going into turn 1. He wasn't. Lewis got a good start, took the lead. And then Max sent it in turn 5 on the very first lap, got a really good run at Lewis and just sent it up the inside. It was actually quite a good move, I think. I don't think there was nothing much wrong with it. But because he was so late on the brakes, he really forced Lewis off the track. Lewis sort of cut the corner a bit and managed to maintain the lead, and then they all argued on the radio because that was allowed back then, another factor that I think is worth probably discussing at some point. Lewis was allowed to keep the lead, and I do think he gained a bit of an advantage there. I having watched it again a couple of times, and bear in mind, I hate watching anything back about this race because it just makes me so angry that the end result was what it was. But that one singular incident, I can understand why Max felt a bit hard done by, because he got the move done, and though he forced Lewis off, that is kind of his right when he has the inside line and he got ahead. Anyway, it's one of those kind of 50-50. If you're Lewis fans, you look at it and say you forced him off. If you're Max fans, you say it's a good pass. Lewis should just slow down, make the corner, and suck it up. Anyway, it's a 50-50. The stewards decided to just leave it alone and let them race. That was kind of the mantra throughout the season, although that resulted in, as we've talked about already, quite a few incidents that probably wouldn't have happened if they'd had a bit more guidance, let's say, on what was acceptable and what wasn't. And Lewis kind of drove off, right? He built a nice chunky gap for himself. There was a virtual safety car relatively early in the race that allowed Max to come in, put on a new set of tyres. Lewis stayed out to maintain his gap, and Max, the way it worked out, Max basically had to make 0.8 of a second every lap until the last lap to try and overtake Lewis and take the win. So it was quite a big gap, and he wasn't able to do that. In fact, within sort of 5 to 6 laps before the main incident that happens, which is Latifi having a crash, because that happens all the time. Hence why the Latifis are the Latifis. And about 5-6 laps before that, Lewis was actually lapping quicker than Max was. And building the gap rather than it coming down. So you and I were watching at my house, fully expecting Lewis to just win the World Championship and contemplate the fact that it had been an amazing season. Lewis had won 3 races in a row towards the end of the season to get it back in the fight and make it make it close and have a shootout towards the end. And Nicholas Latifi goes and has a crash, fighting with absolutely nobody. By the way, at the back of the pack, doing absolutely nothing. He somehow manages to bin the car, and carbon fiber goes everywhere, etc. What do you remember? What do you remember about that crash? Do you remember much about it? Because there's a bit of a conspiracy going around that.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't think it was a conspiracy. No, if it was anyone else, maybe, but Latifi was an error-prone driver, and I think it's probably just a lack of concentration, and it just being a part of the circuit where they couldn't not call a safety car, and so it was just one of those things they had. If he'd crashed somewhere where they could have wheeled the car away, fine, but it was pretty, like you say, there was carbon fiber everywhere. I don't think at the time, if I ever think back to it, I don't think I saw the threat of what might happen. I just maybe thought, well, this is all right. Lewis is still out in front. We'll finish under safety car, and that'll be it. I think the only time I got alarmed, or the first sort of alarm, was when when Max pits and Lewis stays out, because Max is behind, so he's got the opportunity to take a risk, whereas Lewis can't really afford to risk it, because he probably thought, well, we're just going to enter safety car here, better to hold track position. And it's at that point I started to get quite concerned that the Red Bull maybe pulled a really good trick there. But what about you? What do you remember that bit?
Yeah, I think just before I talk about the Latifi bit, I should also mention that Checo did an amazing
hold Lewis up, didn't
job. He? Yeah, so Lewis caught Checo up to lap him. That's how much faster, by the way, Hamilton and Max Verstappen, where Lewis was catching Checo an absolute rate of knots, like 4 seconds a lap or something, when he came out the pits. And Checo stayed out tactically. Red Bull left him out to hold Lewis up, and that's exactly what he did. I think he probably did push the boundaries of defending a little bit, putting the car in some pretty dangerous positions, knowing that if he took Lewis out and they had a crash, it was only to the benefit of the team and to Max. But yeah, he cost Lewis quite a lot of time, and that actually ended up proving to be a really important factor, because when Latifi had his crash, if Lewis hadn't been held up, he probably would have had a pit stop in his pocket, and he could have come in and changed his tyres too. As it turned out, he didn't, so he didn't.
No, I never thought that.
So yeah, Max changes his tyres. I mean, the crash, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there was anything sus about the crash at all, just that it was Latifi doing Latifi things. And yeah, what followed was a bit of a mess, really. So you had team principals in the shape of Toto Wolff and Christian Horner lobbying Michael Massey one way or the other for certain things. Toto was saying things like earlier in the race, "Oh, we don't need a safety car for that," which was really out of order, I think, which he admitted to afterwards. And then equally, you've got sort of who's the guy? Is it the guy Jonathan Wheatley.
Yeah,
That's
sporting
right. Yeah.
director at Red Bull. Yeah,
yeah, he was on the blower to Michael Massey lobbying for safety cars and for things to end quickly, and saying they only needed one racing lap or whatever to end the race, not under a safety car. And all of this is in the context of, as I said, the greatest season we've probably seen ever, arguably. The drive to survive culture, and there was a real inherent desire, I think, within the FIA and elsewhere, not to have the championship finish under a safety car.
yeah.
That probably drove a lot of the decision making that followed. So they're cleaning up Latifi's mess all over the circuit. And under normal circumstances, when this happens, the point at which it becomes safe for cars to overtake the safety car, cars can start to unlap themselves. So whilst they're all going around in a snake following the safety car, you've got Lewis Hamilton at the front. You've then got 4 or 5 cars between him and Max Verstappen, something like that. I think it's like 5 cars.
Yeah.
Who are all lapped drivers. Between him and Max. And the way it usually works is once it's declared safe, those lapped cars, all the lapped cars throughout the grid, can suddenly unlap themselves. Or it says, according to the regulations, any lapped cars can unlap themselves.
And also, I didn't realise at the time, it's once the track is deemed safe, it's the lap afterwards, that's when the lap car's allowed to go. Whereas the track was deemed safe the same lap that they let the lap cars go, which is, again, going against the rules. So
yeah.
Thought I'd clarify that for you.
Yeah, so sorry, we're going to get into the weeds of the regulations here because it is important. So
it's necessary.
It is, yeah. So the regulations state, so the track is declared safe. Following unlapped cars can unlap themselves. The way the rules have been read in their entirety to date has been that all unlapped cars unlap themselves before racing can continue. In this particular case, Michael Massey unilaterally decided to only allow the cars between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton to unlap themselves. Bringing Max in behind Lewis, and then they brought the safety car in a lap early so they could have a racing lap as well. So traditionally, you'd unlap all the cars, you'd have another lap, and then you'd have a racing lap from then onwards. That would be the final kind of safety car lap, and they'd be able to race. But they ran out of laps, or they would have run out of laps. So the last lap would have been undertaken under a safety car either way. So they decided to unlap some of the cars because they didn't have enough time to unlap all of them, and then call the safety car in early and allow them to have a 1-lap sheet out, Max and Lewis. Max on fresh, brand new, speedy soft tyres, and Lewis on, I don't know what it was, but then 35, 40 lap old hard tyres.
Yeah.
And then we have that was so tense. That period where Max is right behind Lewis, the safety car's pulled in, and Lewis is waiting to put the hammer down and try and finish the race and hold Max off. Max is obviously goading him. He's driving up alongside him, doing all the things that have now been banned and outlawed from Formula One, trying to put him off. They set off, and Max does what Max does, sends it into a corner, and takes the lead off Lewis. And then there's actually quite a good period. There's sort of 4 or 5 corners where the racing is actually really good, and Lewis gets
close, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really close, and Lewis gets a really good run as well, coming down the back straight. And Max is weaving. I don't know if you remember, I was yelling at the TV about that because, again, that is not allowed in Formula One. It's considered dangerous. And you often see drivers get given penalty points and penalties and stuff for doing that. And Max was weaving all over the place to break the toe. And it basically stopped Lewis from making a move into the next corner to try and take his place back. And then after that point, it's kind of over because there isn't really another overtaking point anywhere on the circuit. So Max cracks on and takes the checkered flag, wins the race, and wins the World Championship. And I guess half of Formula One fans are thrilled, and the other half are in a state of shock, I suppose, because the sort of the sporting integrity of the integrity of the whole sport sort of been undone in 2 minutes, probably.
I think also as well, there's almost a bit like, well, this has happened, but what's going to happen next? Is there going to be an appeal? What's going to we started watching the celebrations unfold, and we thought, well, this is all very odd, but someone's going to lob an appeal in. Mercedes brought their own lawyer with them, didn't they? In case they needed him. We thought, this might not stand, and so there was that uncertainty as well. And then I remember watching the podium celebrations when Lewis got out of the car and was very gracious and went over and congratulated him, but kind of held it together whilst Yas Verstappen had his t-shirts ready out and was sort of celebrating quite wildly in front of Lewis and his father.
Yeah, that was. I don't know how he managed that. I don't know how he did it. Went and shook his hand, and took it like a champion. Yeah, so I mean, where do you want to start with it? Do you want to talk about any of the kind of the actual incidents or anything, or do you want to start straight into the how did it make you feel? What does it mean for the sport? Why is it
Yeah.
still such a stain? Because it really is. I mean, fixed F1 XCD trended on Twitter for months and months and months. It still does semi regularly. Abu Dhabi 21 is always mentioned online and stuff, and it still comes up semi regularly in the discourse around Formula One, even at races these days as well. I mean, even this season, it's been mentioned a couple of times with regards to Lewis's new contract and stuff, and what motivation that might be. Yeah, where do you want to start with the instance or?
I'll maybe if I start with my initial reaction, we can springboard from there.
Yeah.
I just remember being in a state of shock, like you said, at the as it unfolded, because the start was, like you said, was very tense, and then there was that period of about 20, 30 laps where Lewis was in control. We thought, you and I were standing next to each other, thought, this is simple now. This has all gone exactly as a plan. Here we go. We're going to see Lewis become an 8-time world champion, like absolutely amazing. And then I don't know, just the way it was so few laps, it just spiraled. We kind of descended into hell very quickly. And then I remember we were just sat watching it, just the two of us just watching it on the TV. And I think we're both just saying to each other, this isn't right. This is not right. But we weren't particularly angry at this point. I think we were just in shock, going like, this isn't right. And then I think it was unfolding, and I think there was I remember this. There was a replacement bus service. I had to get it was a longest journey back home for me. I just remember sat on Twitter just constantly just checking to see what people were saying, and I do remember quite distinctively George Russell putting a tweet out, one of the only drivers to come out publicly and call it out, but like this is not right. This is completely wrong. And I was kind of maybe just sort of in disbelief, really, sort of thinking, well, it's all going to be overturned. It's all good. They're going to see sense. And then the Mercedes protest got dismissed, and then the race result became final. And then it became, well, the Mercedes have to go to a court of appeal to overturn it. But then I remember feeling that didn't feel likely. And it was in the run up to Christmas. I just remember feeling like just really angry that, they've kind of ruined this amazing, like I said, this amazing contest. I just felt angry. I still feel a bit angry about it now. I remember the season afterwards. I was furious. I remember people talking to me, saying to me, "Oh, what do you make of that final race?" Or I've never watched one, but I watched that final race, and I didn't think it was right. And I was like, I honestly can't talk about it because it just makes my blood boil. And it's one of the few sporting moments, probably the only one really, that really does get me exercised and really does get me angry. And I just can't get my head around it. How the organisers of the sport didn't follow their own rules, and then when they were challenged on that, they didn't see it and go, yeah, we've made a mistake here. We need to sort this out. It just became accepted. And I think I found quite hard is that Formula One has just accepted it, whereas I think that for so many people that follow Formula One know there was an injustice, know that something wasn't followed properly, and it's just like you don't see many journalists sort of bring it up or raise the battle for it. And I remember Sky being pretty neutral on the whole thing, really, or like other people like Will Buxton, who's in Drive to Survive, him not really sharing his view. There's been a few times where a few drivers have let slip what they thought about it, and I remember at the time people like Lance Stroll in the car were saying, this doesn't feel right, and then I think the advice probably a lot of them got was just to not engage with it. And then I just remember the fan bases on Twitter just becoming very toxic. F1 Twitter was just very toxic, very divisive, and then I just think now you look what's happened in Formula One. You've seen Lewis Hamilton not be at his best for over a season, and then you've had the winner of that race and that World Championship go on and win 2 more World Championships. If I'm F1 and I want it to be the greatest spectacle on earth, that's almost the worst outcome you could have, whereby you lose that rivalry again in quite dramatic fashion, where you have Max stormed it last year and has stormed it even more this year. But then you also have this sort of the whole concept of the sport of it being, is it sport or is it entertainment, being a conversation, that just feels absolutely crazy to me that Formula One has got itself into a position where there was a very live debate, and whenever there is a controversy now, it always reigns up: is Formula One entertainment or is it sport? And I think the fact it went into that, went in that direction shows you how badly the decision was to not follow the rules has had, and how significant that impact has had on the sport. And I think it probably won't take I was trying to think, when will the sport heal and recover from it? I think it probably won't be until Max and Lewis both disappear into the sunset, and Formula One's probably in quite a different place by that point, and quite a lot of time has passed. But for so many people, I think they'll always be angry about it, and we might come on to this later, but I still find it mad that Lewis didn't fight it tooth and nail when it was so clear cut, and he was very gracious, and Mercedes were very gracious. But part of me thought, well, if that was me, I'd probably be pushing quite hard to go. Sorry, I feel like that was a bit of a monologue, so feel free to pick into that what you want to. But that was just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think it felt to me like Mercedes did a deal. I think with the FIA, they pushed for significant changes to how the sport was run, and they got them. Michael Massey was removed. We have a very different
that very public report as well that was published.
Yeah. They put it down to human error and the rest of it. I generally think the drivers are a pretty good barometer for what's right and what isn't after the fact, and the drivers, or some of the opinions I trust most, Russell, Ricciardo, Vettel, Stroll, lol, and particularly those drivers as well that were sat in cars that were lapped and weren't able to unlap themselves whilst their competitors were. I'm not surprised they were furious as well, because they were just sat there wondering, well, that's not right. We've never, not done that in 100 years of sport. Like, how's that come to be? And yeah, I think Ricciardo, his words really resonated with me, because I still remember them now. I remember him saying on the radio, I would not have wanted to have been part of any of that. Whatever's just happened, I wouldn't have wanted to have been part of it. So yeah, I think that was quite telling. So, question for you: why did it happen?
So I don't believe there was a conspiracy to make Max champion. I just don't see that, because if you want to make that the outcome, you create a season like this season, right?
Yeah,
where you create the success. I think it genuinely is a battle, and I think I'm trying to think. If I'm Michael Massey and I'm the FA in that position, I think it's obviously incredibly tough, because, like you said, they were being lobbied by Toto and Jonathan Wheatley, and that was the point as well, where this is the first ever season, I think, where radio messages were broadcast live, so we could hear Toto go, "No, Michael, no, this is not right," But so I think he's under. If I'm trying to be Michael Massey, he's under immense pressure from these two people, but also probably in his head he thinks, right, this is for the championship. I think if we let them race it out, people will say we've had a real fair fight, and they'll go on. I think he kind of massively underplayed, or didn't think about the fact that Lewis was on really old tires, and so it wasn't like, oh, it's an equal fight. It was giving Max an incredible advantage at such a significant moment, and the fact he was sort of completely blowing away with Preston. And I think if the shoe's on the other foot, right, if Max is first and Lewis is second on fresher tyres, and the race ends under safety car, I'd be disappointed, but I'd respect it, because that's the rules. The thing is, I can't respect what happened because of it just going against it. What about you? Why do you think it happened?
So there's a bit of the kind of entertainment culture as well. I think Drive to Survive. We know now that pretty senior people in the FIA were quite desperate to have a new world champion. I think they were all a bit sick of Mercedes dominating and Lewis winning every year, because that would have been his sixth in a row. Yeah, sixth in a row, I think. And yeah, there was definitely a real push to do that. I mean, they changed regulations to do that. Mercedes car in 2020, you and I both agree, is probably one of the best cars ever built. They introduced a load of regulation changes that winter to try and slow them down very successfully. I think there was that kind of that cultural. I don't think it's a fix at all. I don't think there was a kind of, we need to make Max Verstappen a world champion, but there was definitely a set of circumstances created to try and make that a more likely outcome than would have been the case if they'd left the regulations as they were in 2020. Which, again, I don't necessarily disagree with. I think it's fine. They want a competitive sport, and as I said, it gave us one of the greatest seasons ever. So clearly, it was a good decision. But I do think that kind of that culture and that expectation, and then the kind of making the sport as entertaining as possible, they're driving for new viewers, Netflix generation, whatever, is definitely a factor. And then you throw in the fact that you've got a race director who's kind of at the mercy of team principals throughout the race. They're always allowed to phone him up and ask him for stuff and lobby him whichever direction. It's quite hard to be objective. I think some organizations and teams are much better at doing that than others, and Red Bull are probably in that bracket. And I think, honestly, I kind of look back on it and I just think, why, if that was what they wanted, why didn't they just red flag it? They should have just red flagged it with 3 laps to go and said,
yeah.
we're going to have a 3-lap shootout. Everyone gets to change their tyres.
I
Everyone
think
gets
that's what
it's
happens
fair.
in IndyCar. I think where
Yeah.
if there's a safety car incident with 10 laps to go, they red flag it. It's basically like a 6-lap or 5-lap shootout, which is that would have been perfect because then you would have had 5 laps of all-out racing on fresh tyres.
Yeah. It really frustrates me that all of this happened because they didn't feel like they were getting the kind of entertaining fairy tale ending that they hoped for. And yet, if you actually look at the context of all of this and the fact that Lewis had to win 3 straight races to make it a shootout in the final race anyway, he'd come back from really far behind. There'd already been loads of these kind of exciting races and moments throughout the season. Like they already had it. They had the perfect product there, right there waiting for them. And yes, fine, finishing on the safety car would have been a bit of an anticlimax, but it still would have been one of the best seasons ever. And then Max would have gone on to win 2 straight championships straight afterwards anyway. So yeah, it's all just, it leaves a bad taste, doesn't it? I think it's a generational stain on the sport. I agree with you. I don't think they lose the stigma attached to Abu Dhabi 2021 for 50 years, probably. It's as bad as some of the things we saw previously in sort of the 80s and 90s and stuff that still haven't been forgotten about. It's just a shame. I remember the words I kept using, I think, after it happened, were they've ruined it. That was my feeling, because I'm not a massive Lewis Hamilton fan. I mean, you're the bigger Lewis Hamilton fan on the podcast. I like him and I respect him as a great driver, but I wasn't like frothing at the mouth, desperate for him to win the world championship halfway through that season. I was just enjoying the spectacle. It was only really by the end that I thought, do you know what? It would be good for him to get the 8th and break Michael Schumacher's record. And Max is still, is still pretty young, and I was pretty confident he was going to win championships anyway. And it would have been a nice way to sign off the kind of Lewis Hamilton story, because I was thinking as well he might retire at that point. So by that point, yes, I was all in on Lewis winning the 8th, and that definitely kind of resulted in, I don't know, a level of fury that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't feel like that. But yeah, the thing that sticks with me most is that it could have been so good. It could have been the greatest season ever. And yeah, one moment or one sort of 3-minute period of madness ruined a whole year.
You look back on that season now completely differently to what you've done, to what you would have been up to that point. If it'd been I'm not saying it had to be a Lewis win to be a perfect ending, but it would have gone down as the greatest season of Formula One history. It probably still is up there, but I do think that the way it ends massively taints it. The question I had for you: do you think the FIA and Formula One missed a trick with, as you said at the start, Massey was making erratic decisions before we get to Dubai, Abu Dhabi? He was making, in all the different incidents, the rules kind of seemed to swing different ways each weekend, where sometimes Max would get a penalty, sometimes Lewis would get a penalty, one wouldn't, then the other wouldn't. And I do really remember Brazil. That was a lot of people going, what on earth is going on here? The FIA need to step in here. And I think because Max was way too aggressive and he got away with it, he didn't get a penalty. Do you think the FIA and F1 missed the trick by not going, right, the stewarding's not been great this year. We've had some kind of hairy moments with our calls. What we're going to do to assure ourselves that if we get to a tense decision, that it's not on the hands of one person, or how can Michael, we trust him as the race director, but how can he just test his decision or his judgment in those pressure moments for this final race, because we cannot afford for this to go wrong. And it feels like that didn't come into their minds because they left them to it, and they've now, like I say, they left it to human error, which is, what a time for it to fall to human error, right? At the climax of the season.
Yeah, so I genuinely think it's a perfect set of circumstances that all came together to make what happened happen. So I think the sort of spectre of Charlie Whiting is quite a big one in this particular case, because Michael Massey, although he was left to it in the same way that Charlie Whiting was, but he wasn't the same person.
No,
like we talked before on a previous podcast. It's worth going back and listening to it, about unsung heroes. We talked at length about Charlie Whiting and what he did within the sport, and the fact that he managed to do sort of 3 jobs on his own, and how he conducted himself. He was such a strong character and had the respect of everybody in the paddock that what Charlie said went, basically. Michael Massey didn't have that kind of cachet at all. And you throw in that I think they got off to a bad start and it only got worse. Like he made some pretty questionable decisions in the first 3 or 4 races. And once you start that, and certainly once you open yourself up to a level of scrutiny from team principals that are only ever going to fight tooth and nail for what they want and what they think is right for their own team and drivers, the kind of genie's out the bottle at that point, I think. Like, there's no real way for the FIA to solve that particular conundrum, because there was this do you remember the whole like let them race kind of philosophy or whatever that they were supposed to be implementing throughout that season? That only really came into being because the FIA was getting involved in some stuff like racing incidents during the course of a Grand Prix that people thought was a bit harsh from time to time. The problem is there were so many calls to make that change, particularly from Red Bull, because they felt like Lewis was benefiting from stewarding decisions, even though we both agree Max was he still is now, really. I mean, it doesn't have to be these days because the car's so bloody quick, but he was hyper aggressive, and it got to a point at some points, both in that season and the season before, where it was a bit too much. And there was this long debate about, do they need to change the rules? Do the drivers need to drive differently? And like you see, like, do you remember the press conferences where Lewis and Sebastian Vettel and others are asked about, oh, what's it like racing against Max? And pretty much every driver on the grid was like, yeah, we race him differently because he's more aggressive than anybody else here, and he's more willing to have a crash than any of us here. And that's kind of, that is Max, that's who he is. But I feel like they made certain, I guess they allowed that to some extent in the course of seasons prior, and then they tried to clamp down on it at the start of 2021. It didn't really go very well because they clamped down on him probably for instance that weren't really worthy of penalties, and everybody was kicking off about that. And then it swung right in the other direction, and they just said, this whole let them race philosophy became a thing. And then lo and behold, here we are, and they've had 3 or 4 different instances where they've come together and crashed into each other, going into Abu Dhabi. So it's I think the perfect conditions were made. I think it was largely kind of the FIA just doing exactly what the FIA always do and not having their eye on the ball, realising that they should have replaced Charlie Whiting with someone who was a bit more like Charlie Whiting than Michael Massey. And then, all of those conditions come together perfectly in the space of a sort of 5-minute period at the end of a race, at the end of a season. People don't necessarily think straight. And bad decisions are made that you can't undo.
You've alluded to it that it's going to stay in the sport for a generation. What do you think the impact is for the next 5 years? Because I was sort of thinking, as I said, that having Max now win 2 world championships without a real contest is damning. Where do if we have another 2 years like that combined with Abu Dhabi, where do you see that for the sport in the sort of not the long term, but in the next 5 years or so?
I suppose it's just an ever-growing sense of disappointment that season ended the way it did, because it always happens at the end of regulation change, like right before regulation change as well. Teams finally get themselves together and it's really competitive. It's very irritating. I imagine we'll have the same in 2025. What does it mean for now? I don't think it means an awful lot for Max, really. I think he's won 2 more since. I say that he hasn't won the latest one just yet, but he will. He's won 2 more since. He'll consider himself a 3-time world champion. He will think that, and he has said before, he feels like he did more than enough to, and he would have been a worthy world champion in 2021. There's no doubt. And no one would have been able to take away from him beating peak Lewis Hamilton in a really fast Mercedes over the course of a season. For Lewis, it's much more different, obviously. I guess he's lucky he's got 7 other world championships to sit back on and enjoy. But I think it had a massive psychological impact on him in 2022 for sure. He wasn't the same driver at all. He wasn't the same person, I don't think. I mean, he disappeared and he went on hiatus for 3 months. Didn't go on social media or anything like it. Just disappeared off for a while. And
I remember that I'm back post he posted on Instagram of in the canyons somewhere.
Yeah.
I remember messaging when that came, oh my God, he's coming back. This is amazing. This is
yeah, because we're really worried you wouldn't, weren't we? Really, and pretty much everyone was thinking he might sack it in and leave. So I think the ramifications for him were much more significant. I actually think it kind of it transcends both drivers. Really, I don't think we'll at some point in 20 years, 30 years, whatever, we'll do another podcast and we'll probably talk about the greatest drivers ever. And either way, both Lewis and Max will be in the bracket. They'll be in the conversation with Senna and Prost and whoever else. Schumacher, obviously, but it's more about what's happened to the sport, I think, since then. The fans, as you said, are really toxic. Some of the behaviour and stuff we see in the stands as a result of that toxicity is quite unpleasant now. There are definitely fans of certain teams that don't feel as safe going to certain races on the calendar, I think. it's that it's quite hard to shake. And yeah, in the context of sort of sports and entertainment, I suppose, and those two things combining to make Formula One what it is, there's a lot riding on the next couple of years, I think, for F1 and the FIA, because if we do end up progressing as we seem to be at the moment, and it's going to be a kind of Max Verstappen domination for several years, it'll be 5 years worth of domination instead of 4. And yeah, that doesn't do that doesn't do much for keeping your audience entertained, does it really? So yeah, it's just a shame. It's just a shame. I think they had such a good opportunity to finish the perfect season off and a brilliant narrative that was already there written for them, but didn't do it. So yeah, here we are still talking about it nearly 2 years later, and it's still incredibly painful. Like, I was watching some of it back earlier, and I can't. There's just things I'd forgotten about that race as well. I'd forgotten how far ahead Lewis was and how comfortable it was, and yeah,
I can't bring myself to watch it again. I saw the Drive to Survive one, and that just made me really angry. But I can't bring myself to watch it. I just I had one point and a question for you. I think you're right on the sort of the fan base, because it did become a lot more toxic, and it's probably the first time ever I've seen Formula One fan bases be like football fans, where that sort of hatred, it's a bit like Manchester City versus United, or Arsenal versus Spurs. Hatred between Red Bull fans and Mercedes fans, and that was online all over Twitter. And like you said, it did spill through into sort of the grandstands. Whereas previously, I would always thought everyone in Formula One, everyone had their own sort of people they backed, but it wasn't as partisan and as cutthroat and as toxic as it became as a result of where people lied on that issue and who they supported. My second question is, my question is why do you think Mercedes didn't fight it? Why do you think they kind of accepted? Obviously they put the appeal in, which is fighting it, but why? What do you read it as of them not taking it further? And do you think they were right to not take it further?
No, I don't. I think they should have fought it all the way. I understand why they didn't, and I suspect the reasons are probably the following. So, one is around: do Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton really want to win a world championship in a courtroom? Yeah. Probably not. Yeah. Probably not. That brings a whole new level of potential scandal to the sport they're involved in. They're a massive player, as we know. They were constructors champions in 2021 as well. There's quite a lot of risk to take on there if you're Mercedes and you decide to take the sport as it is to court, basically. And all the stuff about social media and the fan bases and the rest of it, you're just adding fuel to that already quite toxic fire, I think, by doing that. So there's a factor there. Cost as well. It would have been an expensive exercise, I think, for them. It would have taken a long time. You're talking about a world championship probably being decided 6 months after a final race and halfway through another season, potentially as well. Yeah. And yeah, maybe. I mean, I think Lewis's kind of gracious nature or whatever probably was also a factor as well. The fact that he's publicly was sort of willing to accept it after the race and take it so well. Like, all I thought to myself with that when that decision was made is, like, imagine if that's Alonso. Imagine if that's Fernando Alonso or someone else. Pick another driver, but particularly somebody like that. There's just no way that we wouldn't have gone further. It's just not possible.
Well, I was going to say, you say pick another driver. We're kind of seeing it at the moment because Felipe Massa, who missed out on the 2008 World Championship, he's put a lawsuit together to basically sue the FIA and Formula One, saying, I was robbed of a World Championship, and the FIA knew what they were doing because of what happened at the Singapore Grand Prix and the fake crash that then meant that Alonso pitted and he won the race, and then when Massa pitted, they cocked up his refueling his car, and then he crashed out. And he said, if that pit stop hadn't been forced on me, we probably wouldn't have made that mistake. I would have won the points to then be world champion. And like he's trying to take that to court at the moment.
Yeah,
over 10 years since it's happened? 15 years after it happened, actually. And he's apparently, I saw today, he's relying on Lewis Hamilton to help collaborate with him, but Lewis is not going to go to court and give up his own world championship. But I wonder if Lewis does get drawn out, I wonder if that will prompt him to think, maybe I do consider this once I've left the sport. I won't do it whilst I'm still driving, but could you think we could see it in the future, or do you think it's dead and buried now?
I don't think so. I'd be really surprised. I don't know. Lewis just doesn't strike me as that kind of person. And as I said, like he's got 7. I don't know if he's necessarily in the sport for records. I mean, we know he's in the sport, to win another world championship. I think a big part of that is Abu Dhabi, though. I think that's proper motivation for him now. Like he looks, and just think of some of the little things you said about Max and Red Bull and stuff this season. Just he looks a different animal at the moment, I think, and he's gearing himself up for that battle again. But I don't think that's because he wants to break Schumacher's record. I think it's because he wants to win a world championship he thinks he was robbed of. And I don't think
he like you say. I think he probably wants to get revenge on Max, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't. He doesn't want to win it in a courtroom. He wants to win it on the racetrack.
But then what happens if he doesn't win it? What happens if the next 2 seasons go and then he leaves as a 7-time world champion and the 8th should have been his and he never wins the 8th and he remains level with Schumacher, which is not a bad thing to be joint with Schumacher, but for some people I feel like, well, it should have been 8 and he was robbed.
I think it will, and I think there'll still be people, and you and I will be 2 of them, who refer to him as an 8-time world champion, regardless of what happens the next 2 years. I think there will always be an asterisk next to that championship in the records. I don't think that will change. I don't think they'll go back and make any change. Like, they're not going to fight that again, or I don't think they will anyway. But yeah, I'm sure we'll still be talking about it in 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as people leave Formula One, I think you'll see people come out and start talking about it, won't you? People like Checo when he leaves Red Bull, or people like Christian Horner or Marco when they retire. And I think there's a biography on Max about to come out in the next week or so. And it'd be interesting to see if that brings any insight, if anyone's sort of given any good interviews about that as well, and how they cover that as well. But I'm sure it's going to be a topic of conversation for a long time to come.
Absolutely. Should we spent nearly 45, 50 minutes on
shall we? We were going to cover 2 controversies. Obviously, we've had to give Abu Dhabi the time and space it deserves, and I feel like we've delved into it in quite a lot of detail there, a real sort of discussion. Now, how does this sound for proposition? We cut straight now to the predictions game for the Singapore race this weekend, and I'll do my controversy at another episode. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, because I know the controversy you've picked, and that warrants a long discussion as well, because that's a fascinating one.
I mean, we love talking about Formula 1, but we could literally be here for another hour, and then I think that we don't podcasts are good, but I don't think anyone signed up for a 2-hour podcast of just us talking about controversy. So we'll tease that for another time. So as we said, we've got the Singapore Grand Prix, the night race. It was the first ever night race, and it's kind of had that sort of accolade sort of taken from it now. With there's how many I've lost count of how many night races there are, because there's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, there's Vegas, there's Abu Dhabi, which is day into night. I think that is it.
I think so. Yeah, it does seem to be a lot of the Middle Eastern ones.
Yeah, but then some. Well, who is it? Is it Bahrain? Bahrain's night. Sorry, did I say Bahrain?
No. Is that another night race? I'd forgotten. That's
night race. But there's definitely someone who. Oh, that's it. Miami. They're trying to make theirs into a night race as well. So it's gone from 1 to now nearly half the calendar. But anyway, so we're back there in the humid conditions of Singapore. It's incredibly hot and sweaty. Will Max go on and extend his win streak? But before we predict a race winner, let's get onto our predictions for this weekend.
Well, just before we get to the predictions, global warming update. Can you guess what the forecast is for Singapore this weekend?
Here we go again. Heavy rain?
Yes.
We've never seen heavy rain before, have we?
I think so.
Oh, if it's tropical weather, that would be absolutely scenes.
Well, as long as the race can go ahead. I always think, wet race would be great, and then it heats down with rain, and the race gets delayed 3 hours.
You say that. I've actually got a free weekend this weekend, and I'm planning to watch the race, so it better not get cancelled or be rearranged, because I'll be flipping miffed having missed the last couple.
Yeah, you've been busy with weddings and whatnot, haven't you? So yeah, no, fingers crossed we get it this season. Okay, so Singapore Grand Prix predictions. You remember last time was a draw, 10 points.
Yeah, our first ever draw. Will this weekend be our first ever 0-0-0?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no, but you never know. We'll give it a go. So you, first up, you got number 12, my new favourite driver, Oscar Piastri.
Oh man, I mean, I'm not saying oh man because it's Piastri. I'm saying that the McLaren. The McLaren is so hard to predict. I'm gonna go with 8th.
Okay.
I feel like if he does better than that, then great, and if he does worse than that, then I'll be covered either way.
Okay. And then this one I'm really pleased about. You got number 9, Daddy's favourite boy, Lance Stroll.
Oh, did you see the comments today that Mike Crack, the team principal of Aston Martin, said that Stroll was on the same level as Alonso?
Mike Crack is talking out of his.
Oh, that's gonna be one. That's good. If we do like a highlights reel of the season, that's got to go in there because that's one of your best jokes yet.
He must hear that semi regularly. I would have thought.
Yeah,
surely.
Probably does.
But either way, I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think he's got Stockholm syndrome. To be thinking saying stuff like. But anyway, where do I think Daddy's favourite boy is going to come? I reckon he's going to come 13th.
Okay. And then you got T'other McLaren, number 8, Lando Norris.
Oh, I'm going to go 6th.
Okay.
Come on, McLaren, turn up. Don't embarrass me.
Right. I got number 11, Esteban Ocon.
Ooh, that is a tricky one.
The Alpines have not been favourable to me thus far.
Oh, yeah.
But Ocon has been more reliable than Gasly. Will they get any points? No.
The team principal-less team will be pointless as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm going to go Ocon to finish 12th. Then I got number 3. God, Fernando Alonso.
Oh, we've both got both the Astons. Your favourite.
Yeah. It's not gone well for me every time I've had Alonso this season. I think this might be...
He's always done something odd. So he's going to really, is he going to bin it in the wall or something? That's a good Singapore 2008 reference, which we were.
We'll return.
Which we'll come back to.
I think I'm going to go with 6th.
Okay.
I'm going to go with 6th for Fernando.
Nice.
And then I lucked out. I got number 1.
Oh,
sorry.
Congratulations. 0 points there for you. I mean, you've started well because if you've only got 2 drivers now rather than 3 drivers to get 0, so it could happen for you.
I really want to be bold and say Max DNF.
Don't do it. Because you'll be so angry. You'll be more angry than you were about Abu Dhabi if that happens.
But imagine, I feel like if I predict Max to finish last and he comes last because of a DNF, I should wipe my whole score for the season.
I'd maybe consider that. But if I can also see that if you predict Max to DNF and then he comes first, I can see you saying to me, "Oh, allow it. That's my my mulligan. I'll cancel that one out."
I wouldn't do that to you. No, I'll go Max first and be boring.
Okay, well, I mean, like you say, we're now starting on the train. We've kind of gotten past the point, you and I, of being annoyed about him always winning, and I think you and I are starting to get on the train of he's going to win every race, or he's going to win the remaining races. He's going to win every race bar 2. Can Red Bull do it? I think we're slowly getting on that hype for that. So
I think so.
That fools that narrative quite well.
If we have to watch the spectacle as it is at the moment, I would like for history to be made.
Yeah, exactly. So we're playing out the station on this narrative. So let's go with it.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry we didn't get to the second scandal/controversy, but we will do that in another episode. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend? Hopefully they enjoyed the podcast more than Will enjoyed his late night trip back home after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2021 on his rail replacement bus service.
It was 2 buses.
2 buses. Grim.
It was bleak.
I know, and it was. So you left quite late, didn't you? Because we were keeping track of the protests and stuff.
Praying for a miracle.
Yeah.
Alas.
No. Go on, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say we're going to be discussing the race after next weekend if it goes ahead in the tropical storms.
Yeah, that would look good. Look forward to that. Yeah, it should be. Singapore's often quite a good one, I think. And catch us for our content online. We're on Twitter at Lights Out Lads, and on Instagram we are at the Lights Out Pod. Yes, Singapore, soggy Singapore, as it will probably come to known on Sunday. Yeah, I feel like I've got a good feeling. I don't know why. It might be just because I'm hopeful for Piastri and Lewis,
Nice.
obviously.
Nice.
But yes, I've got a feeling the race could be good.
Qualifying is usually good because they really push it, don't they? I mean, was it 2018 or 19 where Lewis pulled that lap out of absolutely nowhere, or when Vettel won Vettel's last win, wasn't it? When he got the amazing pole as well. So something always cool happens at Singapore, and also I do really like. It's the best night race, I think, just because it looks so cool and it's so hot as well.
And it's a street circuit for our specialist Sergio Perez.
Yeah. Oh, will he actually find the top step again? Will he? Or no, it's a street circuit. He's on this current form. He is 100% binning it. At some point in the weekend, that car is going off of the track. He might not fully bin it, but he'll definitely go off at one point. He's got one of those every weekend at the moment. So maybe we should start making that as part of the British game. Will Checo manage to keep the car on the track for all the sessions?
Yeah, you wouldn't be. Yeah, it's probably not a terrible bet, that one.
No, although they've changed one of the chicanes to make it easier, so fingers crossed he can just drive straight through that rather than spin off the circuit. But you never know.
Your disdain for Checo has I've quite enjoyed watching it grow this season. It's been cultivated.
You make so many bad errors and you ruin a world championship battle in such drastic fashion as he's done, in such embarrassing fashion as he's done. I have very little sympathy for him. No matter how hard it is competing in a team where it's all geared up for the other driver, I have very little sympathy for him because he's made some amateurish mistakes. And I like on the train of Max going on winning every race and Red Bull doing it. I'm off on the train of just seeing Checo surprises every weekend because it doesn't seem to be stopping really.
Yeah. Well, I need Checo to have some more poor results if my prediction that Lewis is going to finish above him in the World Championship is going to come true.
Yeah, true. What's the gap now?
It was 40 points before the last race. I think he finished second, didn't he? Where did Lewis finish? Fifth? Sixth?
Yeah,
sixth, I think. So yeah, what's that? 50.
It's growing
something.
again.
50 something, but there's still quite a few races left. So. And obviously Lewis is going to win in Brazil, so.
Yeah, not long to go. Very good. Well, that's all from us. All the best, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.